Welcome to Journals of Self-Discovery. Hello and welcome to this month's edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. If you don't know already, there are show notes to each episode. If you go to spiritualteachers.org/podcasts, you will find links to all the episodes. And if you click on those links, that'll take you to the show notes. Why bother looking at the show notes? Well, it's an easy place to find links to all the resources that are mentioned in an interview, whether it be a book or a movie or a person's website or some other resource that came up during our interview. It's pretty handy, and I suggest you check those out. Now this month I do have a special request of people. I know that several of you have left a tip in the tip jar, which is one of the links on my site, and I really appreciate that. I offer these podcasts for free, but it's really nice when someone does contribute a little money towards it. Right now, I'm using a new recorder, which I bought just for this podcast. So thanks to all of you who've donated towards that. But this month, the money's not going towards me. Any donations I receive this month are going to the TAT Foundation. And the foundation is currently raising funds to build a retreat center in North Carolina. So I'm really excited about that project, and in fact, they are in the final stages of raising funds for that, and are doing a 60-day challenge, which I'm a part of. So I'm reaching out to all of you to help me help the TAT Foundation raise these last funds that they need to begin construction on the retreat center. If you'd like to know more about that project, you can actually go to tatfoundation.org/tat-home, tat-home.htm. If that's too complicated for you, just go to tatfoundation.org and click on the About button, and you'll see a menu, and in that menu, just click Homing Ground, and that'll take you to the page to learn more about the retreat center that they're building. Well, now that all that's out of the way, let's get to the good stuff, and that is today's guest, who is Daniel Ingram. Daniel is the author of Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, an unusually hardcore Dharma book. I was turned on to Daniel's work probably about 2 years ago. Started to read his book. I found it unusually hardcore, and I didn't get very far in it, to tell you the truth. But second time around, I've been looking at it again, and I've heard some very positive things about Daniel from a friend of mine who's worked with him. And this time around, I was really struck by the book. Wanted to talk to Daniel, and as you'll see, we had a really great interview. We talk about his early years of seeking, some of the common pitfalls that he's seen in seekers, as well as his, what I think, extraordinary claim that if you follow the practices as outlined in his book, that will lead you to enlightenment. So, without further ado, here is the interview with Daniel Ingram. First, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this with me. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, happy to help if I can.
Great. And I wanted to begin the interview, frankly, at the beginning, or the very early beginning. I was curious if you grew up in a family that had spiritual interests, or if that was something that just sort of developed on its own.
Well, so I think all families are likely to have some relationship to spirituality, even, depending on how that goes. Both of my parents are spiritual in their very different ways. And my mom actually was doing Vipassana retreats before I even knew what that was. I was probably a teenager or somewhere when she did her first Goenka course. I'm not exactly sure when that period was, although it wasn't something we really talked about much. So it wasn't, curiously enough, even though my mom was doing Vipassana, we didn't really talk about that. And I got into it through totally different channels on my own. My father is sort of generically supportive. His spirituality is tricky to describe. He might be classified as an odd mix of scientific materialist, rationalist, academic, coupled with vaguely Christian something. He says the Lord's Prayer before he goes to sleep every night. And then he has seen and believes in ghosts. Mm-hmm. So put those together, but he's relatively open and unimposing about his religious views. Doesn't talk about them much, particularly, though clearly leads a very spiritual life. Both of my parents are very spiritual in their way.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned as a teenager, it sounded like you. Is that when you first got involved in your own search?
So it's hard to exactly tell where it all began. I crossed the arising and passing away somewhere around the ages of 14 and 15, which is an insight stage for those not familiar with Theravadan terminology that usually involves big openings, explosions of consciousness, traveling out of body, kundalini phenomena, blah, blah. It's usually most people's big first sort of what they think of as an awakening experience or something. Mm-hmm. Although the Theravada would put that sort of somewhere on the map before awakening, but whatever. Anyway, the point is, though, is that I did not know what it was. I had no conceptual frameworks for it, and it definitely made its mark on me, though I didn't really understand that connection at the time. I was just a kid, and in junior high school and high school, which were strangely stressful times. I was relatively philosophical from an early age, but in terms of formally spiritual questing, that sort of started in college, and then really started going on retreats about a year and a bit after college, a little over.
Mm-hmm. The experience that came to you when you were 13 or 14, it just came out of the blue, sounds like?
I don't think so. So tracking it way back, and this is the kind of stuff that can make people look at you funny when you say it, but, whatever, I'm old enough, I don't care anymore. So when I was about 3.5, I used to be able to get into what we would call jhanic states. So I used to be able to lay down and get into these very, very blissful, peaceful states just by sort of chilling out and noticing breathing. Where in the world I learned that, I have no idea. And why I lost it somewhere around the age of 4 or so, and wouldn't learn anything like that again until I got formal meditation training over 20 years later. I'm not exactly sure. So that's the first interesting data point. The second interesting data point would be that I spent some time at a Quaker school in second through fourth grade in Durham, North Carolina, where we would sit in silence for 10 minutes before school every day. And then I actually took a class in fourth grade that was an elective. It was a very interesting sort of hippie school where it was called Close Encounters, and it involved, analog synthesizers and all sorts of other strange things. It was just this sort of very weird mishmash of this teacher just sharing their interesting eclectic life with us. But one part of that was visualization meditation, where we, do the standard things where you'd, squeeze your toes and then relax them and feel the, golden healing energy coming in or whatever. And we'd visualize ourselves getting very big or very small and walking around our bodies or walking around the universe or whatever it was. So it was that kind of stuff. That was, somewhere around 1979 or so. Mm-hmm. And then I started, I've had flying dreams and lucid dreams since I was probably 5 or 6 years old is the earliest one I can remember. And I've always enjoyed them and found them fascinating. And somewhere in my teenage years, for reasons I don't really understand, I started trying to make it more likely that I would have flying dreams. And before I would go to sleep, I would start visualizing these gigantic 50-foot billiard balls in space and practice visualizing myself flying around between them. Where I got this, I have no idea. There was no one telling me anything like this. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. And whatever process that started tripped off the arising and passing away event. And during a dream, I basically a large witch riding on a black horse pointed a wand at me, and my consciousness exploded all over the room. And I woke up to my body sort of being in fragments, buzzing all over the room, and sort of then snapped back into my body, and my body was buzzing, and then I was buzzing, and then this very weird, energetic, vibrational, strange, sort of weird Kundalini-ish thing. And then that's sort of really the formal beginning of more cycling of that. And I would cross that same event in different forms about 6 times before I finally started doing meditation retreats in August of 1994 at the Insight Meditation Society with Christopher Titmuss and Charles Rogel and Jose Rezig.
Now, I think if that had happened to me when I was 13 or 14, I would have thought I'd gone completely insane.
Well, it only lasted, I mean, it was a very brief experience. It was very powerful, but, the whole thing in terms of the real fireworks lasted maybe 5 or 10 seconds. But it was definitely quite a moment. The thing is, though, having no frameworks for it or having any idea of what it was, there was nothing to really hang it on. Do you see what I mean? There was no sense, oh, yeah, this is something significant. It just happened and I moved on. So it didn't get really much processing at the time. Later on, when I would learn the maps of meditation, I'd be like, oh, yeah, that thing that happened when I was a kid, yeah, that was kind of important. So.
So what drove you to go to or to enter into formal meditation practice?
Well, so the first point is that when you cross the arising and passing away, it's like you're halfway in and halfway out. So it starts some process that then somehow gives you this sort of strange sense that you need to finish something or find something or do something. It's like, and it may not be entirely obvious to the person what that is or what they might be looking for, but it did, at least for me, provide some sort of general, very poorly calibrated homing beacon to something, right? And so I philosophized and I did various things and sort of homebrewed some of my own meditation things along the way, and then ran into a guy named Kenneth Folk in college who also had crossed the arising and passing away under various circumstances previously in his life. And we were trying to figure this out, and we didn't really have any good teachers or things. So we sort of, read everything from Ken Wilber to, various other mystical writers like T.S. Eliot and stuff. And then finally, Kenneth Folk went back to California, and he met a guy named Bill Hamilton. And Bill Hamilton said, go do, here's what you're looking for, and here's how to do it. Go do the 3-month meditation retreat, the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. And he did that. And then he went off to Asia for a year of meditation practice there. And when he came back, I was like, wow, okay, that seems like a good idea based on some of the changes it seemed to produce in him. So some years later, I started doing my own retreats. And that was that.
Okay. So I've heard the name Kenneth Folk before and seen it on the internet. He's about the same age as you?
He is 10 years older. So he came out from California to play bass in the band I was running sound for, and then we became friends, and he ended up being a roommate of mine, and then I went back to California, and we kept in touch, and that's how a lot of that went down through Bill Hamilton's influence.
Can you give me a sense of some of the traditions that you followed and experiences that you had over that period of time? Is that too big of a question?
Yeah. Oh no, that's so there were two sort of main traditions, both of which are pretty explicitly Buddhist with a few little additions. So my first retreat I went on was with Christopher Titmuss and Charles Rogel and Jose Rezig. Christopher Titmuss was a Thai monk, so he teaches in a Thai forest style, though definitely filtered through his remarkable personality. Charles Rogel, actually, while she teaches Vipassana, actually came up in Hindu Vedanta with Punjaji, the Buddha of Lucknow, as he's sometimes referred to. And so, and then Christopher, when I would go on retreats with him, my first 4 retreats were with Christopher. No, sorry, first 3 retreats, and then 2 later retreats, were with Christopher Titmuss and the people that he would have around him who were variously eclectic. So Fred von Allman was very Tibetan, Mahayana, Vajrayana-ish guy. And then Yvonne Weir, I'm not exactly sure what she was, very spiritual and very wise. But and then Subhana, she was a mix of Zen and Vipassana. She's a rare person who has dual lineage in both of those traditions. So I would sit with them. And then I started doing Mahasi Sayadaw practice when I went to MBMC in the summer of 1995. and sat with a guy named Saido Uraginda. And that's when I really learned noting. And I'd had a lot of interesting experiences up until that point, but that is when I feel like I really learned to practice. That's when I really started to get a sense of what technical mastery was, what the maps were, how to really do stuff. And then, so that was my third retreat. And then my fourth retreat was with Christopher Titmus again and crew. And I think I may have gotten something in my retreat order earlier wrong. But anyway, the point is that that's when I got what we would call, in the Theravadan tradition, stream entry, is sitting with Christopher Titmus and his fine crew, Norman Feldman and some of the others as well. So at the Thai monastery in Bodh Gaya, and that would have been January 13th, 1996. And then after that, it was a bunch of retreats at Bhavana Society and more with Christopher Titmus and crew. And then more at Bhavana Society, a bunch of different retreats over the years influenced by Bhante Gunaratana, which is Sri Lankan Buddhism, as well as a whole lot of reading that, was quite broad. But in terms of the practices, I was doing very relentlessly Theravadan with some Vajrayana-ish model and conceptual influences that sort of brought more of a accepting and open relationship to the emotions and what the Theravada would sometimes call defilement. So I actually found that a fusion of the two basic Theravadan techniques that just are like 6 sense doors, 3 characteristics, 8 jhanas, 16 stages of insight, 4 paths, that very basic stuff, with coupling that with sort of a Vajrayana perspective that came through the writings of Chogyam Trungpa and, sitting briefly with Chokya Nima and some local Kadampa stuff. And, so there was a range of influences in there. But the vast majority of it was very straight up Mahasi Sayadaw, Theravadan, Polycanon, and commentarial Buddhism. Too long an answer? Is that all right?
I was thinking to myself, now I'm going to say, but I don't really understand everything that you just said.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Sorry.
I'm just teasing a little bit.
Please stop me at any time, because I can just sort of go off. And so just please interrupt if you have any questions about anything, because I don't always understand exactly who my audience is going to be and who might be listening. So it's important to clarify things so it just doesn't sound like meaningless gibberish.
I'm sure I recognize some of the names, and I'm somewhat familiar with some of the traditions, and I'm sure there'll be many people who are listening that are far more familiar than I am with all of those. One thing that you said that really struck me is this idea of a fusion of different practices or different traditions, which is something that I have felt in my path has been very important, as opposed to just following one teacher or following one tradition. Did you run into any opposition, if you will, within yourself or others that you shouldn't mix and match, let's say?
Say that again so I understand your question a little bit better. Opposition within myself, meaning?
Meaning, did you have any thoughts that, maybe I should just stick with one tradition or one teacher, or did you have any teachers who recommended that to you? Because I think the idea of the fusion is important, but not everyone. Well, I mean, I've heard some teachers say you shouldn't do that. You should pick one thing and stick with it.
While I was sitting with a number of different teachers, in some ways the emphases were very similar. So, 6 sense doors, 3 characteristics, meaning impermanence, suffering, no self, hearing, seeing, thinking, feeling, etc., is pretty core vipassana across the various teachers I was sitting with, focusing on the breath, learning to concentrate, learning to gain some metacognition on the mind to understand what it was doing and redirect it to what you wanted it to do, to, notice the sensations of the body, to not get lost in the stories and tape loops of the mind. Those were all pretty stock and standard instructions. There were some little differences here and there, but most of it was pretty straight up Theravadan vipassana. Now, that's not to say everybody had exactly the same take on things. And where the divergence really became, the key divergence was later, when I actually had some insight and I was sort of in what I think of as the middle stages, where each of the various traditions has various maps of what they think the territory of awakening should look like and how it should progress and what stages you should go through. And those really hinge on, at least from a Theravadan point of view, what relationship you should have to what are generally called the 10 defilements. So with the emotions and sort of darker emotions of greed, hatred, delusion, restlessness, worry, doubt, fear, those kinds of things, jealousy, etc., lust, coming up, and whether or not those should be, eliminated entirely or attenuated or seen clearly as they are, becomes a great source of debate, and division within the various strains of Buddhism. So the various strains of Buddhism, the Vajrayana, the Mahayana, and the Theravada, do not all agree on their maps of awakening. And, when you get into that territory and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I tune my mind to get a more clear understanding of what's going on? And, the emotions are a substantial portion of what we end up having to deal with on the cushion and in the rest of our daily life. And your working model is likely to have a strong impact on how all that goes. Mm-hmm. And I came into it with one working model, which was a very straight up four paths Theravadan model. And then I ended up getting insights that convinced me from my own experience that that was not going to be an optimal model for what I was looking for. And then I was lucky enough to find the Vajrayana models, which advocated for a much more broad and inclusive relationship to the emotions, and by finding teachers like the five Buddha families, which sort of say they're the unawakened and the awakened versions of all the emotional energies. So, you can have Vajra anger, which would be sort of the awake version or whatever, which is or that kind of thing. It's a moderately dangerous concept that people can use to justify all kinds of terrible behavior all the time. But still, the point of sort of feeling each of the emotions as energies, as real living mammalian things, as more colors and textures, became much more important to me than figuring out how to eliminate the emotions that I didn't like or found unpleasant. And so that was where the real divergence between traditions began, and still continues in some ways. So, and the politics of around that is very complicated. Because while I teach meditation techniques that are relentlessly Theravadan, I don't use all of their maps. And so that puts me in a strange place where nobody really wants to quite get behind that necessarily. That's not true, actually. So it's interesting as I've gotten to meet more meditation teachers, I've had people come up to me and go, actually, the way you look at that is actually the way that makes the most sense to me in my own practice. And these are, teachers that have, written big books and teach at big centers and stuff. So anyway, but that was where the primary divergence came in. And that was very stressful for me initially when I started to feel that sort of tension and pull, as my own experience was telling me one thing and the maps and models were telling me another. And right. That initially was pretty painful, and now I'm fine with it, but there was a transition there.
Well, regarding your book, which lays out, I presume it lays out as best as you could your complete map of the stages to enlightenment.
Yeah.
I've started reading it, and I'll definitely recommend to people, don't try to read the book in 2 days. That doesn't work.
Yeah, not easily, no.
No, I gave a somewhat noble effort, but I've failed. I do want to ask you though, right off the bat, just to get it out there. I mean, on the front cover it says the Arhat Daniel M. Ingram.
Yeah,
I mean, you're certainly not shy about saying that. I'm enlightened, and I'm assuming that one equates arhatship with enlightenment.
Yep.
Is there anything more that you're looking for to discover in that realm of, and I'm not sure of your language, transcendent experience, if you will, or in your map is enlightenment and arhatship, that is the end?
Yeah, it's a great question, and like sort of the big question, really. So first thing, the word transcendent it would be sort of, I would actually say this is sort of the reverse of transcendent, and that it's sort of ridiculously embodied in a weird sort of way. So the first important point is that in this experience, whatever you want to call it, right? And so the politics of using this language is pretty toxic a lot of the time. So by
Yeah.
saying something like the Arhat Daniel Ingram, that could be seen by many as a pretty obnoxious or toxic move. And for some people, it definitely is. So my apologies to anybody if that caused any trouble for anyone. The benefit, though, is that some people go, oh, wait, it might actually be able to be done. You could actually do something real. This is, or at least someone's claiming that they can do something. And the nice thing is you can, the way I look at the meaning of the word, and we could debate, forever the various texts and all that. But the point is that when the six sense doors are just seen all the way through as they are, meaning that no sights, nor sounds, nor thoughts, nor physical sensations, nor tastes or smells or whatever are creating any sense that there's a permanent, stable, observing, controlling, central, separate, permanent Daniel, then that is what I would call arhatship. So, and this is something you can learn to do. So if you paid enough attention to the six sense doors and just notice them happening again and again, and really notice all the sensations that seem to end up being you will find that they're all totally transient. They all seem to just be happening where they are. You can't find a stable observer. You can't find a stable controller. You can't find a stable thinker or a stable anything. You can find patterns of repetition that you can try to, turn into some sort of sense of a self, but it's this incredibly ephemeral, changing, fluxing, moving thing. And the more clear you get about the basic sensate information coming in, and this is really Vipassana 101, notice what's happening, in your sensate world. The more you do that, the more you can deconstruct the sense that it really is any permanent self. So the nice thing about that is, regardless of all the politics, it's doable. It's verifiable. I know a reasonable number of other people who have done it and come to the same conclusion, that they think, yeah, this is something that, the Buddha seemed clearly to be pointing to. And if you do these techniques long enough or well enough, this seems to be the logical endpoint. So that's one axis of development, is just the perceptual clarity that cuts through the fundamental illusion of duality or separateness or permanence or, abiding selfhood or whatever you want to call it. So that's one thing. And then there's the rest of it. So developmentally, right? So that insight happened to me in April of 2003 while on retreat with a guy named Sayadaw U Pandita Jr., so named to distinguish him from Sayadaw U Pandita Sr., the monk who wrote a number of books and is better known than he is. But he was a remarkable teacher, and I'm very, very grateful to him and all the other teachers, by the way, for their support. I should mention that now. But the developmental stuff has continued. So, that happened, how many years ago is this now? 14 years ago. And obviously in my life, I've grown a lot since then. I became a doctor. I had a whole lot of, I guess I was already technically a doctor. I'd graduated from medical school, but it's not really like being a doctor, like going through residency and spending years working in, level 1 trauma center. So I have done a lot of clinical practice. I've gotten older. I've, understood more about life. I hopefully have matured a little bit. And in terms of practice, things continue to unfold. That's the remarkable thing. And the interesting thing is all the traditions make a pretty extreme distinction between arhatship and Buddhahood, or whatever you would call some final something. So even within the Theravada, there are very clear lines drawn between arhats and Buddhas. And so the elimination of all unskillful personality traits would be something, that you would accomplish at Buddhahood. The, elimination of all skillful karma would be something you wouldn't even accomplish until the death of a fully awakened Buddha. There are all these additional things to work on. So there were arhats who didn't have concentration skills or jhanas. There were arhats who didn't have powers, and so these are all things that even from a traditional point of view you can work on. And clearly, the Buddha himself even matured as he continued to teach the Dharma as he wandered around northern India and Nepal or wherever he was. So, you can see sort of a progression as he taught in terms of, letting nuns into the order and, the way he related to the order and the way he related to teaching and the way he related to all kinds of stuff was very different from the moments after his first awakening, when he didn't even think any single other person could understand what he had understood, as it was too subtle and too difficult, which was the first conclusion he came to about the Dharma. And so in that same way, I clearly continue to grow on lots of fronts, and it's been fascinating to watch, but it's been a whole lot nicer from a place of insight. So, I would definitely recommend, learning Vipassana well, learning the shamatha jhanas well, the concentration states well, practicing morality well, following the Noble Eightfold Path, if you want to be all sort of formally religious about it. But, basic sensate clarity seems to be an extraordinarily good idea, and it really can deconstruct viscerally, moment to moment, the sense that there is any abiding self, and you can lock that in as an understanding that eventually just is locked in, and there's no other alternative. You can't, you couldn't figure out how to go back if you wanted to.
When you were deep in your practice before the experience of arhathood, if you will, or ship, did you formulate the desire that, I'm after enlightenment, I want to be awakened, or was it something else that you were after, or did you even think of it in that way?
You mean when I started going on retreats back at the beginning?
Yeah, or in the middle stages, if you will. Were you aiming? I'm kind of thinking of myself, like I had this idea of enlightenment, and like I want this thing. I don't know what it is, but I want it. Was there something like that for you?
So the idea was always very intriguing, and then I went on my first retreat. And when I went on my first retreat and I got to be around teachers who were clearly extremely wise and clearly very awake, it was like, that's it. I'm going for that. Have a nice day. I'm going to figure out how to do that. And I radically restructured my life, my schooling, my career path, and everything to fit with my retreat schedule, plans, and desires in the early years. And finances and everything suddenly took a total backseat to trying to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head. I totally understand that drive or that desire or that reframing of one's life.
Yeah.
I believe that you make the statement in your book that if a person does the practices that you have outlined in your book, like that will lead to enlightenment. Is that that's a very bold statement to me. Do you actually have folks who have done that with the book, who have followed it and have gone through the stages?
Yes. And so the first thing is these practices are not mine or anything. So they come out of original. Yeah. I mean, that's the first really important point. It's not like it's just my stuff, right? I was taught by a whole bunch of people who were taught by a whole bunch of people who got this stuff, from very old texts, and goes way back. So that's the first thing. Is I may have a slightly different voice to it or a slightly different take on it, but it's not original material. This stuff has been well time tested in tons of monasteries for a very long time, and particularly in the 1900s to 2000s. What happened with the sort of real renaissance of Vipassana and insight practice and meditation that happened in Thailand and Sri Lanka and Burma in particular, really revived a tremendous amount of validation of techniques that were very, very old, and produced a whole lot of awakened teachers and a lot of awakened other practitioners. And, Mahasi Sayadaw clearly showed that if you put someone who's willing to follow instructions and able to follow basic instructions in a Mahasi Sayadaw, insight retreat, and you put them there for 3 months, they've got about a 50% chance of getting stream entry in that 3-month period of time, which is a really high success rate. And then after that, you're in the stream. So the other paths are, well, inevitable is sort of the wrong word. In some ways, in this lifetime, the insights and cycles just keep on going at that point, because then you've really thrown the switch and you're in the thing. So, um, this, and as plenty of other Thai forest people and other meditators have noticed, there is something mechanical about this. If you can get people to actually do the techniques, and then they get insights. And if you can get them to learn to focus, they get concentration states. And if you can get them to follow the teachings of morality, their minds and hearts and things, get softer and wiser and better and kinder, and that's just true. So. It's verified again and again and again. I guess you could sort of point to my book and say, yeah, there are people who have followed my book to that. But what they're really following is a whole bunch of stuff that came from a whole bunch of people before me to that.
One concern that I have about maps, and this goes back to teachings that I was following early on, is what I would call a danger of placebo effect, if you will, of following a map. That
Scripting.
Scripting? Is that what you said?
Scripting, yeah.
Scripting, yeah. Oh, yes, we may be saying the same thing. That if I do X, Y, and Z, I've been told it's going to lead to this state. Everybody says it's going to lead to that state, and therefore I kind of create that state because I'm following the map. Is that sounds like that's something that you're familiar with?
Yes, except what happened to me, from my own experience, is I had crossed through these stages. I'd crossed through the arising and passing away, which is the big, sort of explosion high where you're all like, excited to practice, and it's very pleasant, and it's amazing, and can involve all kinds of cool experiences. And then you hit what we call the knowledges of suffering, or dark night, or whatever you want to call it, which follows the arising and passing away like thunder follows lightning. And then if you're lucky, you get to equanimity, and most people then fall back and cycle around that a whole number of times before they get to what we would call stream entry. And then even after that, there's a whole lot of cycles. But that said, I had crossed through that exact cycle exactly as the old texts predicted it, many times before I ever found the maps. I mean, it was like clockwork. And so I was on this retreat. So when I was introduced to the maps, I was on this retreat at the Malaysian Buddhist meditation center with Sayadaw U Rajinda. And I had gone through all this crazy stuff, I had gotten all these weird, sort of mechanical jerking sensations, and I was messing up the breath. And then I'd gotten into all this sort of blissful stuff, and these wild shakings and vibrations, and crazy, dropping down into these, deep, sort of almost time-stopping, narcotic goo strangeness. And then it was like seeing this whole field of terrifying green skulls and all these, sort of experiences that I were like, what the hell? I was sure they were the kind of thing that were totally unique to me. The notion that anybody would have ever mapped these, much less with specifics, much less the exact pattern in which they had unfolded for me on that retreat, and numerous times before on previous retreats, and even in daily life. I had no concept of that. And then towards the end of the retreat, he played this scratchy old tape, that clearly had been played hundreds of times, of some old Burmese dude with a really thick accent describing the stages of insight. I was like, oh my God, really? Really? He just said exactly what had happened in order with freakish levels of detail. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. They knew? They knew? Wow. But it was a good thing that they played the tape, because I'd gotten to a stage that's known to be a really hard stage, which is called reobservation, which has a boring name, but is a ass-kicking stage. And I had gone from being able to sit for, hours at a stretch with no problem to 5 minutes on the cushion was, producing the most unbelievable aversion and creepy sensations in my body. And I would literally find myself just jumping up off the cushion, unable to stop myself. And so they played this tape, because what you want to do is convince someone in that difficult stage that, hey, you're just right on the cusp of something awesome called equanimity. Which is a really nice stage. So he played this tape, and I was like, wow, okay, even though this is horrible, if I'm really close to equanimity, then, maybe I really need to get back to practicing and practice well and sit through this. And that's exactly what happened. And that's the kind of empowerment that the maps can produce. So yes, they can cause people to script and do practice, but if they actually are still doing the technique, it doesn't even seem to matter. Because if you're doing the technique and actually noticing the arising and vanishing of what happens at all your 6 sense doors, and notice that happens on its own, and find any little strange tensions or things in there that could constitute a sense of suffering, then regardless of whether or not you have the maps, it's still going to move you along. And regardless of whether or not you have the maps, if you're not doing something like that, you're unlikely to make progress in the same kind of way from a Vipassana point of view.
Yeah, yes, I appreciate you saying that. It just kind of the pieces of my argument fell in place, if you will, of it's what you said about if you're doing the practice, because people who fall into the danger of the map are just reading the map and imagining.
Right.
But if you're
And we
doing the
see that.
practice, it will, and walking, it will take you there. You
Yeah,
can't fake it.
that's right. And the other thing is, as hundreds, so I run a website called the Dharma Overground. And, it's got 5,000-ish members and I don't know how many lurkers, but quite a few. And as literally hundreds of people have noticed, the maps really help them because they're like, me or my partner or my, girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever had this crazy experience of all this vibrational stuff and Kundalini stuff and saw bright lights and body was shaking and were hypersexual and didn't sleep for 3 days and, could, read other people's thoughts or whatever, wild experience they had in the arising and passing away. It's not always that dramatic. And then they hit the dark night and they're like, wow. And suddenly I demolished my finances, my relationship, or, they demolished our relationship or whatever in career and schooling and all that stuff in the dark night, like people do. And they're like, wow, I wish someone had told me about the maps and how to compensate for them, and that this is sort of not normal behavior, but we see it a lot. And there are literally hundreds of reports of people spontaneously who have gone through these cycles and stages, which are freakishly predictable, as anybody who's taught meditation retreats knows. If you put people on meditation retreats and they do the technique, they go through these stages in order, have a nice day. And so as Vipassana teachers, we hang out and talk about the, relentless predictability of this. And people find it incredibly helpful to have that normalized, to say, oh, this is not just some weird, out of the blue thing. There are actually, bits of theory that can help me navigate this skillfully and not screw my life up and not make it more or less than it is and not fall into the standard traps. Because there are standard traps at each of these stages that people very commonly go wrong. And it's, not unique to them. I mean, it's just almost predictable. Just like you learn when you start searching for anything you think is a unique thought on Google, that hundreds to thousands of people have had the same question or thought. In the exact same way, these spiritual stages, the development of attention and concentration, seems to be freakishly predictable, really almost in some ways, regardless of technique, because people, from Christian contemplative traditions and people from, Vedanta traditions and people from, all, shamanic traditions. And I see all these people who enter the same stages through very, sometimes techniques that superficially look very different, but have to involve basic sensate clarity and basic investigation of what's going on.
With the people that you have worked with, are there common traps, if you will, or is it pretty specific to each person? And if there are common traps, can you name a few of those and ways out of them?
Yeah, so sort of going in order of sort of the most common things that people run into, and I'm just going to name stages and talk stage terminology. So this, what we call stage 2 is a stage called cause and effect. And in the stage of cause and effect, whatever you pay attention to has some consequence for how it moves, and how things move has some consequence for your attention. So this is the stage when people say, I'm messing the breath up. I'm messing the breath up. I can't pay attention to the breath without messing it up. And it won't just flow normally. And it seems all jerky and sometimes stopping. And like, it feels like anything I do with my mind is screwing the breath up. Well, that's actually an important insight stage. And if they think that in that stage, they're not supposed to be screwing the breath up, that's not going to work, because that's what that stage is about. It's just the mechanics of how attention unfolds. And so that can really throw some people, and they may stop practicing because they feel like, oh, the breath has to be a certain way, or or they try to do something else, or they stop paying attention to the breath, even though the breath is a really good object, as plenty of people have noticed. And so that's the kind of thing that can mess people up. Or the next stage is called the 3 characteristics, sort of a boring name for a stage that usually involves a lot of what we call hard pain and weird body tensions and weird back stuff, and your posture can get all goofy, and it can like get weird neck and jaw tensions that are very asymmetrical, which can be really uncomfortable and can really throw people. And they can say, oh my golly, I must be a really horrible meditator because I've got all this pain, and I'm supposed to, it shouldn't be this hard, and they don't understand what's going on, when in fact That's a normal stage of insight practice. The next stage, weirdly enough, is ridiculously blissful for a lot of people and can involve a whole lot of, vibrations and Kundalini stuff and seeing bright lights and, having sexual dreams and traveling out of body and psychic powers. Not everybody has all that stuff. So, I don't want to, make and it's a sort of a complicated stage, so it can have a lot of aspects. It's worth reading about in detail. I'm not giving anything resembling a full description of it here. But the point is, those things can really freak people out. They can become sort of hypomanic or even fully manic for a little while. They can become utterly fascinated by all the strange stuff that's happened. They can become totally freaked out by it. It can involve radical paradigm shifts. They have affairs. They do wild things. They can be very creative and very cool and very inspiring and very interesting, but it can be very disruptive to a lot of people's lives. The next stage, weirdly enough, is called dissolution. And that's where all of a sudden all the wild, bells and whistles of the stage of the arising and passing away basically vanish. And people feel like they can barely get up off the couch. Like, they just kind of want to lay there and go, yeah, not much going on. and they're like, wait a second, I was just high as a kite and I had all these amazing abilities and my mind was so powerful. And now I can barely meditate at all. And I feel like I'm just kind of like going to fall asleep or whatever. What the heck is going on? And they feel like they're going backwards, and that can be disorienting and confusing. And the next stage is one called fear. So fear can involve, for some people, sort of exhilaration, thrills, and chills. But for other people, abject terror and panic for no obvious reason. And they may try to figure out, reasons to kind of hang on the emotion. But it's almost like a tail wagging the dog, where they feel afraid and they'll figure out some reason that they should be feeling afraid, even if there's no good reason. And they can leave retreats, leave monasteries, they can become paranoid. They can, think other people are out to get them. It can be a really strange stage. And then misery, disgust, desire for deliverance from the observation are stages that can totally disrupt relationships. If they were hypersexual a few stages ago in the arising and passing away, now they suddenly may have no interest in being with their partner. They end relationships, they end careers, they get mad at their bosses, they project out their anger and their frustration and their deep existential crisis and all kinds of people all around them. It's a really common time for people to just totally demolish all kinds of stuff and end marriages and all that stuff. So next stage, equanimity, is a really pleasant stage. It's broad, it's expansive, it's wide open, it's flowing, it's so nice. And people may not understand that this is actually something awesome, even though it may seem so low key to some people. They may not even notice. It's just like the bad stuff's gone and now they're just fine. But they may not recognize that is actually right on the lip of awakening, and they just have to learn to see it a little more clearly in flux and flow and see a few key elements that stage makes it very easy to see in order to awaken. But a lot of people will just sort of get lost in how nice the stage is and totally slack off in their practice. And it's not like it takes a lot of effort to take equanimity up on the opportunities that it offers. But it does take a little bit. And so a lot of people will just sort of slack off there and go, I'm fine. I don't even know why I was practicing. Everything's good. I don't I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm just going to kind of walk down the road and go get myself a sandwich or something, when, maybe actually a few more minutes on the cushion or something might have been all it took to really get some serious insight. And there are lots of other temptations that arise along the way, but those are some of the most common ones. Was that, again, too long an answer?
No, I appreciate the detail. And I think people listening will appreciate the detail.
Right. And there's a lot more details to this stuff written down if you want to check the standard sources like, Abhidhamma and, Visuddhimagga, Vimudhimagga. There, a number of places these things are written down. My book, obviously, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. Jack Kornfield does a nice treatment of these stages in his book, A Path with Heart. In the chapter called Expanding and Dissolving the Self. There are plenty of other books that cover this kind of material. So go find it somewhere if you're having interesting spiritual experiences or going on retreats, because if you're practicing, it's almost inevitable you're going to run into this stuff, or you're going to run into it in the people around you, your partners, your teachers, your friends, and it can be really destabilizing for them. And if they have some concepts that can help them figure out how to navigate these more skillfully and put them into some sort of framework, that can really help people do a whole lot better and have better outcomes.
In another interview of yours, I heard you mention the shadow side of practices, and I'm not really sure I understood what you meant by that. Could you say a little on that?
Yeah, so all of these practices have their shadow sides. So, for example, training in morality, a really good idea. Right speech, right livelihood, right action. All these things. can have real shadow sides. So some people who become, really into morality can become very rigid or uptight or judgmental or critical of themselves or their and those around them, very sort of harshly puritanical. And people who train in concentration can rapidly become addicted to some of the extremely pleasant and profound states that deep concentration practice can produce. And so then they may think, oh, this is all I need. That's all I need to do is get deeply into peaceful states. And they may not actually awaken what we call the golden chains. So some of these spiritual side effects that can be produced that are great effects. I mean, it's not like those states don't cultivate remarkable qualities of mind. They do. But that said, they're not the whole thing. And so people can become addicted to those or sort of lost in those. And then vipassana. So vipassana, insight practice, the shadow sides of it are complicated, but they can become sort of very, as people learn to sit through large amounts of pain or difficult mind states or, harsh vibrational experiences or whatever, people can become sort of like that in the rest of their lives, where they may just, it's just one more painful thing and they just sort of ignore it, like they learn to, sort of like just notice their knee pain is just more vibrations or their back pain is just more vibrations, when not all of life does best when you have that response to it. There are some pains and difficulties and stuff that you actually want to do something about rather than just sit there. Mm-hmm. So it can become sort of people who, sort of do too much dry insight work, as we call it, where they're, don't have the jhanas to help them, can become sort of dry and harsh and flat and edgy and restless and sort of ungrounded and destabilized if they just go into, realms of really fine, ultra fast vibrations and really analyzing every little blip and speck of what happens in their experience. That can be very powerful and also can produce shadow sides. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. In terms of each of the traditions, each of the teachings, each of the ways of conceptualizing of awakening, all can produce something that is a shadow side. Like if you say, awakening, in order to, be a good person, you should practice loving kindness practices. And then people sort of, then use that as a way of ignoring the fact that they might be really angry about something. That anger could become a shadow side that they could then come out in unskillful ways that they might not notice. The list of possible traps is gigantic, but each of the practices, the techniques, the traditions has endless temptation to do something with it that's not as skillful as it was originally intended to do, and in fact can be harmful or destructive to you and those around you.
In your experience, does it take another person to point out that shadow if you have fallen into that, or do the practices themselves have some mechanism that helps to prevent it?
Both are true. So if you continue to practice well, there can be plenty of self-correction, but it is vastly easier if you have fellow co-adventurers, teachers, Dharma friends, Sangha, community, whatever you want to call it, because often people can see our shadow selves and shadow sides and aspects in a way that we can't. And things, these things are usually glaringly obvious to everybody around us, and we may be totally blind to them. We all can be guilty of that, myself included. And so I definitely highly recommend that if people are going into this, they have, if not teachers, at least wise Dharma companions that are farther down the path than they are, who are skillful and kind and can help them to see. Because it's easy to go wrong with this stuff. It's easy to become imbalanced. And not that we don't learn things from that sometimes. We do. Plenty of people have learned a lot from their sort of accidents and adventures and misinterpretations of the teachings. And you figure out why they, gave whatever warnings associated with that, teaching there were, hopefully. So again, sometimes something good can come from unfortunate processes, but in general, it's a whole lot easier if you've got people around you who know what they're doing and are older than you or more, spiritually advanced than you are, even if not older than you, and have, trained and well under the guidance of good people. I mean, it definitely, both teachers and friends help.
Is the online group that you mentioned, it was Dharma Underground, was it?
The Dharma Underground is the original thing, which still sort of kind of almost exists. It's not particularly active at the moment, but the Dharma Overground arose out of it. So originally, I was out on the web as, with my claims to attainments or whatever and putting labels on things, which, as most people noticed, can get you an enormous amount of internet flame war stuff and trolling and stuff sent in your general direction. And plenty of people decided, yeah, it's not really for me at this point. So originally we started something called the Dharma Underground, which was a password protective website, where a remarkable group of very advanced and skilled practitioners gathered to discuss these things. And after a while of discussing them in secret and private, we realized, actually these discussions are discussions that would be fine to have in the open web. And so we opened it up and created the Dharma Overground, and it's been the Dharma Overground ever since. So
okay. I was curious if that group functioned in a way that could help people with things like seeing the shadow side, or if that was something that was really too difficult to do online and actually needed face-to-face conversations.
Face-to-face is clearly a lot better, but you can definitely do some of that work online, as we've all noticed. And we do, it's a geographically very disparate group. It's all, it's from people all over the world in lots of different countries and continents. And not only do online forums clearly show that people have shadow sides and that you can point them out, not always with perfect accuracy, but enough to, but you definitely get to see people's shadow sides. You definitely get to see people pointing those out. And you can also keep in touch with people through other media like Skype or, other online, or phone or other ways. And we do occasionally have gatherings where we have met together or come together in various ways. So through all those methods, it is true that the Dharma Overground has helped lots of people to practice, and there's a diverse range of talent there, but a reasonable number of the people who help contribute there are quite advanced in terms of practice, very skilled, awakened, technically savvy, scholarly, and there is a real pool of talent there that is willing to lend a hand to people. So that's one of the nice things about that group is for all the complexities that come, happen when you run an open online forum. That said, we have had a reasonable proportion of people there, and still do, who have a lot of insight, a lot of skill, a lot of Dharma depth to offer, and offer that freely. So
when you use the word awakened, what do you mean by that?
So when I use the word awakened, I use it in the same sense that I meant it earlier. I would add some, the maps get a little complicated, but awakened would be someone who has at least stream entry, and a stream enter has, so a stream enter would be the first stage of awakening in a Theravada map. So 4 paths, stream enter, second path is, Sakadagami, or, once returner, and then there's third path, which would be Anagami or never returner, and then there would be Arhat's fourth path. And then there's, you can get into Bodhisattva Bhumi models or, Buddhahood levels or, whatever you want out past that. If you want to go for those kinds of models, which are interesting enough, and why not? So, because there's probably more stuff to map out there. But so that's, when I think of the stages of awakening, that's what I'm thinking about. And I still look at this through sort of a modified Theravadan lens with some other concepts added in through some of the Mahayana and Vajrayana stuff. But the technical definition of a stream enter is kind of complicated, but usually involves having completed a whole cycle of insight up through, mind and body, cause and effect, 3 characteristics, rising, passing away, dissolution, fear, misery, disgust, desire for deliverance, reobservation, equanimity, and then getting path and what we called fruition, where the entirety of reality vanishes and then reappears. And then that changes the brain in ways that makes one a stream enterer. Their waking experience may not be all that different, sometimes depending on the person. So how people react to this and how they describe it varies pretty widely between people and practitioners. It's been interesting to see that range. But at that point, they tend to cycle naturally through the stages of insight. They have other things they can learn to do with their minds. And at that point, other stages of awakening are likely to keep progressing while they're alive and their brain's in good shape. So, and then, but, when I think of, sort of the walking around awakening that comes with the later paths, is a real sense of appreciating the immediacy of experience. So that each moment is really that full, immediate, complete moment, that any sense of past or future or just thoughts occurring now, to the degree that that is naturally seen, that is some aspect of awakening. To the notion of what I would call sort of intrinsic manifestation or awareness or luminosity or however you want to put it, that the awareness of phenomena is within the phenomena themselves. So awareness is not some centralized thing, but is intrinsic to the manifest colors and textures and space and everything that make up experience. The degree to which that person appreciates that reality is happening naturally, not in anyone's control or controlled by any central sort of agent. The degree to which so as a walking, living experience, one appreciates that the whole thing is happening totally on its own. And the degree to which someone appreciates that there's no sense of a centralized observer. So that there is not some intelligence or some spot in the middle of your head or, behind your eyes or wherever you think it is, or in the middle of your chest or wherever, that is sort of the center point or stable, person. And to the degree that that is experienced, clearly as being just more flowing, immediate, transient, causal, natural sensations, that's what I think of as aspects of awakening. And eventually that can become your whole living experience. So there aren't any aberrations from that, so that everything that arises is perceived that way, with those qualities, and it pervades everything. And at that point, that to me is the good stuff.
Got it. Yeah. There was something specific in your book that caught my eye. You mentioned the 5 spiritual faculties. And you had them as faith and wisdom, energy and concentration, and mindfulness. In energy
and that's traditional. That comes out of the Pali Canon, so that's not my stuff. That's old, very old Theravada 101 stuff.
I appreciate you saying that. I keep referring to all of this as your stuff, just because I'm referring to your book, but sure, yeah. In regards to, you gave the example of a person who, let's say they're sitting and they're trying to meditate, trying to concentrate, and they're fidgety or maybe they're sleepy, and you mentioned how a person could adjust their level of energy and concentration to find a balance. And I was curious if you could say anything more about that from a practical level. Like, how do you actually adjust your energy? If you're tired, are you saying do some jumping jacks and then sit back down? Or what do you mean by that?
Well, so the mention of posture change is actually one of the first strategies you can try. So it's a very simple strategy. If you're like, let's say you were doing reclining practice and you were finding yourself falling asleep, well, you could try sitting. Or if you were doing your sitting practice and you were feeling yourself falling asleep, you could try standing. Or if you were trying your standing practice and you were feeling yourself falling asleep, maybe you needed to get some more sleep, but or not eat, such a heavy meal or something. But then you could try walking. And so, so the first thing you mentioned, jumping jacks, basically posture correction. So in a place, during the day, our energy level changes, and depending on, how much we've worked recently and how much we've slept and what we've just eaten and all those things, our energy levels change, as well as our level of physical health and thyroid and, metabolism and, caffeine intake and all this stuff will modify it. So simply modifying ordinary physical factors like getting enough sleep or, enough exercise or enough sunlight or, dealing with your depression or whatever may be. So things that are straightforward and maybe not particularly, don't sound particularly woo-woo, you know what I mean? Like those are just easy things to adjust. But then, and sometimes that'll just do it. Like, if just change posture and try a posture that's more energetic if you're sleepy, or simultaneously, if you're too restless in some posture or too ungrounded, try a posture going in the other direction. If you feel restless sitting or feel a lot of pain, maybe your mind would do just fine with reclining practice because you've got plenty of energy and you're not going to fall asleep. So you can adjust posture. That's a first basic thing to do. And then you can adjust what you do with your mind. So certain focuses of mind and certain techniques are more or less energy producing than others. So a lot of people find the breath very calming, unless you look at it really, really, really fine and fast and try to figure out, how many hundred sensations are there in the breath between the top of the breath and the, bottom of the out breath. That kind of practice can be really engaging and really energy producing, as opposed to someone who's, sinking down into the smooth flowing, beauty of a circular, expansive breath might find paying attention to the breath very calming and soothing. And so that only, so that helps to show what you're doing with your mind can radically affect your energy level. So like I tend to do, I tended to do a lot of really rapid fire noting, many times a second, noting sensations as they arose and vanished, breathing, thinking, seeing, hearing, feeling, whatever, really, really fast. That kind of practice is very, very energy producing and very engaging. And if you're feeling, sloth or torpor, which would be the traditional words for those who are boredom, try upping the resolution power of your mind and see how fast your mind can possibly go. Because there are lots of sensations coming in every second if our mind is attentive to them. Similarly, trying narrow versus broad objects will radically change the sense of energy of the thing. If you're just sitting, listening to what's going on in the whole room, subtle sounds, the air conditioner, maybe crickets, in the distance, or a subtle, creak of the roof as the light hits it, and it changes temperature or something, will produce a very different effect than, let's say, if you're doing some really rapid fire mantra practice, like some, ultra fast, 100-syllable mantra if you were doing Tibetan practice. Those are likely to have very different effects on your energetic system. Or, and then once we get better at this, we can learn to actually literally just say, okay, I want to be a little more calm. Boom. And because you've trained your mind, you can just call up calmness and say, oh, I'm too restless. I need to calm down. And you can just feel your energetic system shifting down, the energy coming down, and the attention stabilizing and grounding down. Or, conversely, if you've gotten, better at practicing, and we've gotten some more internal control and wiring built up, sometimes you can just say, okay, wait, I'm really sort of slacking off. I just need a whole lot more energy, and just call it up just by asking for it and go, oh, there it is. And so more skilled practitioner will just have that on tap, or say, oh, I really need some more equanimity in the face of this, or, oh, I'm getting kind of dark and dry and heartless. I really could use some more rapture. And I realized I've just switched from talking about the 5 spiritual faculties to the 7 factors of awakening, but it's this, it's a similar list, right? And it's a similar set of concepts that just by refocusing on specific qualities, or if you're like getting really kind of bored, but there's a little bit of bliss somewhere, you may be able to just focus on that enough to turn that bliss into something really awesome if you're doing concentration practices. And just recognizing that you can do that and learning how your brain does that and seeing, okay, if I direct the brain this way, it does this. And if I direct it that way, it does that. You can learn for yourself exactly what works for you and what brings up energy, what moderates energy, what brings it down, what increases concentration, what broadens concentration, what focuses concentration, what leads to better investigation, what leads to better acceptance, what leads to better, equanimity and tranquility, and what leads to better mindfulness. And sometimes, like if you're feeling yourself getting lost, maybe you just need to open your eyes, right? I mean, some people, if they close their eyes early in practice, will just kind of get lost in their thoughts. And maybe you need to ground in an external object like a kasina object or a candle flame or a Tibetan tanka, or, which would be, like an image of, something like a green tar or something. Maybe you just need some external thing because when you close your eyes, you're just going to get too lost in your stuff. And other people have their own other sets of issues, which, this is what, makes it hard for me to practice. But luckily, any well-developed tradition will have a large number of remedies, and if you have good teachers around, they should all know them, because that's hopefully how they got there and why they're able to teach, is because they know how to help people through some of the stages and know what the standard remedies that work are for each of the various difficulties that can arise.
Is the Dharma Overground, is that a place where, well, it sounded like that's a place where people can go and find who you would consider to be good teachers?
So the structure of the Dharma Overground is really interesting, and that there are a reasonable number of people there who are sort of formally Dharma teachers. They have classes, they lead retreats, they do whatever. But there's a larger portion of people who are, I guess you could say that they teach Dharma because they help people learn to meditate in an online forum, but they may not explicitly necessarily think of themselves as Dharma teachers, or they may not have that as sort of their explicit day job or their, major hobby. A reasonable number of people there are just other people who have insight, who like helping other people to gain insight or concentration, or to learn about, the old texts, or to navigate the politics of Buddhism, or whatever it is. There are lots of things to learn in this business. And plenty of the people there are just sort of volunteers who love talking about the stuff and love exploring it and love sharing it. And that's just their thing. So while there are teachers there and there's clearly different levels of talent, it has very much a more sort of, egalitarian is the wrong word, but it's not a strictly hierarchical model, if that makes sense. Even though there are some people there who explicitly think of themselves as Dharma teachers, there are no people that are designated by like the Dharma Overground as teachers, if that makes sense.
Got it.
And so it's got a sort of a more, again, egalitarian is the wrong word, but it's not socially, structurally hierarchical, even if there is a hierarchy of talent.
I ask because I didn't follow a Buddhist path myself, and it's not something that I know a lot about. But I do have a few friends who've been in some groups, and I've sat in on a couple of groups, and it seems very rare to me to find a Buddhist group that is talking about attaining enlightenment. Like that's why we're here. That's what we want to do. They seem to be involved in a lot of other things, in my opinion. So I was curious.
That's true.
I was
and
just
that's
curious
what I found is
what you thought was like, if that's what I want, awakening, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, where should I go?
Yeah, so that is very similar to what I found when I explored a lot of local Buddhist groups and various centers, and even major meditation centers. Plenty of the people there were there to further their psychotherapy, or there to, get away from some situation, or just because mindfulness seemed like a good idea. But even on, somewhat long retreats, plenty of the people there would have thought that the concept of awakening would be an absurdity. And of course, they couldn't awaken, which is ridiculous and sad, right? I mean, these are a lot of very accomplished people who may have, learned to do all kinds of other things extremely well. And I'm sure they could learn to meditate very well too. And some, eventually do. But the focus of Buddhism as it comes to the West not being awakening is a prevalent one. And that was actually what I initially found, I had a very hard time finding local people who was into who liked, the kind of stuff I was into, which is states and stages and maps and old techniques and really delving into this stuff deeply and learning it for oneself, which you would think would be the focus of Buddhism. But most of the time, Buddhism as it comes to us is more of a sort of moral lessons and some nice dogmas. And it's kind of more like, what church is for a lot of people, which is a spiritual place to gather and get support from friends around a common set of teachings and dogma and icons and stuff. But wasn't designed for, radical perceptual transformation and plunging the depths of consciousness. So that's one of the reasons that the Dharma Underground and then the Dharma Overground were formed, is that I was having myself a very hard time finding other people to connect with on this stuff. And even when I went on other online forums that were available at the time, if you actually started talking about real practice, the flames and trolls would just come out, and it could get pretty... it didn't look very Buddhist, but just put it that way. Anyway, so this website, and then a number of its sister websites. So there are a number of spinoffs, like Awake Network, which at one point was the Dharma Forum, Refugees and Baptist Head, which is, some of these are no longer online, but there are a number of sister forums also that have that same spirit as the Dharma overground, where we think the point is deep practice, the point is radical transformation of consciousness, the point is learning the old states and stages, the point is exploring these things as far as they can go and as far as we can figure them out in this lifetime, and we believe it's doable, that we can do it, and that the old techniques and tricks work, and that if we just get the dose high enough, through retreats or enough daily life practice or whatever, this stuff will happen. And so that's basically, it is a very different paradigm from what you find a lot of places. And weirdly enough, a lot of the places that are not into this stuff, when you say those kinds of things, really react, what's the word? Not very politely. Mm-hmm. So, so if and that's fine. Everybody's got their thing, right? And so if your thing is something other than states and stages and, really deep, learning to do all kinds of cool stuff with your mind, cool. Plenty, fine. But if you like that kind of thing, then there are places you can go for that, and places online and places in real life. So there are plenty of good meditation centers with teachers who will talk about these things and, really do expect real progress and real practice. And anything else other than that, they're going to be like, what the heck's going on? Why are you not making progress like we would expect progress if you were actually here doing the techniques?
What do you think happens to a person who dies but hasn't awakened?
Yeah, so the whole rebirth question it's funny, I get asked that one a whole lot. It's a weirdly popular question. So the first thing is, I've had past life experiences where, I have this notion that I was a this or that in some previous existences. So those are interesting experiences to have, but practically, I would say the point is, in this life, if you awaken, it will be vastly better. So there is no comparison from my own experience and the experience of my fellow Dharma co-adventurers in the before and after. It makes a gigantic difference. Not that not that it transformed every aspect of this mammal, right? There's still a mammal. There's still this body. There's still this life. I still pay bills. I still go to a job, and there's still illness and sickness and conflict and all that stuff, right? But the experience of it and the perspective on it is really different and really better. And so regardless of anything about next lives, I would just do it in this one because it's totally doable. Just, go to Pandita Rama Lumbini and do 6 weeks or 3 months there or something and rock it out. Just follow instructions and get awakened. And, it's sort of sounds cookbooky, but it actually is, because people who go there and follow the recipe get awakened and get insights. So, or go to Pandita Rama in Yangon, or go to MBMC in Penang, Malaysia, or go to Tathagata in San Jose, California, or go do the 3-month at IMS, the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, or, there's lots of other options. There are a bunch of centers in Thailand, and there's plenty of other good teachers and traditions, or go find, in some, Tibetan tradition, or there are awakened Zen masters. Go study with these people. Do what they say to do, within reason, don't allow them to exploit you or anything, which happens on occasion, as we all see from the scandal sheets, but pick good teachers, follow their instructions in reasonable dose, and go wake up. And so, because I don't think there's any excuse not to, unless you've got, serious debility or serious, so there are people whose brains and bodies are just not going to handle what it might take. Okay, fine. But if your brain and body are in pretty good shape, then go do it, because it beats the heck out of not doing it. And so I don't see any reason to sort of ask questions about some other life or some other thing when it is totally available here. You just got to dedicate the resources and time, and interest. It's straightforward from a weird point of view.
And would you say the difference between someone who's awakened and someone who's an arhat is a matter of time and dedication and energy?
Yeah. Okay. So so again, we get into the complexities of the politics of that word, which obviously I asked for when I put the word on the front cover. But But yeah, so it's a question of like, there are plenty of awakened people who haven't dissolved that last little bit of center point, that last little bit of holdout of sense of stability or isolated independent perspective or whatever. But the brain only has so many tricks, right? There are only so many categories of sensations that it can, try to pretend are self. And eventually, if you just get good at noticing, oh, this is what's happening right now, and you bring attention to what I think of as the core processes and some aspects of space and the sense of, effort and the sense of, who you are, and sort of turn the attention, sort of, it's a weird thing because you sort of have to turn the attention back on itself, right? So to go kind of Ramana Maharshi on it, but it also really helps to turn the attention out wide and notice the luminosity of the entirety of everything that's in your full field of conscious awareness. And so if you do those long enough, eventually there's no more tricks the mind can throw at the thing, and it just flips over. So yeah, I mean, from a certain point of view, it's a question of just time and maturation of the thing. But there are techniques and focuses that can help, as well as, I don't mean to get all woo-woo about transmission. There is definitely something to be said for hanging out with people who have done this. And I'm not the first person to have noticed that. You can attribute it to whatever magical or ordinary effect you like, but the effect is real, regardless of what you ascribe it to. And those people are around. I mean, you can find them there. And there's enough of them out there these days that, unless you're just incredibly poor or have very few resources or whatever, there are ways to find and sit with these people and hang out with them.
You mentioned a couple of books, and that reminded me that a key book for me early on was The Experience of Insight, which is Goldstein, I think. I found that incredibly valuable. So I was curious if, other than your own book, if there were any other sort of introductory texts that you would recommend to people.
So I recommend Mindfulness in Plain English by Bhante Gunaratana. Fantastic stuff. If you want a deeper dive into some little more complicated, A Map of the Journey, I think it's by Ujjodika. That's a great book. I really like A Path with Heart. If you like it sort of a little softer and more eclectic and slightly new agey, that's by Jack Kornfield. Still a fantastic book. There's a lot of deep spiritual wisdom in there. It's almost so nicely written that you can miss how much good stuff is in there. If you like things a little more liturgical, or I would recommend Buddha's Path to Deliverance by Jnanati Loka, and it just takes a lot of real core Theravadan texts and says something nice about them, organizes them well. And if you like more of that kind of thing, I would, you could pick up like the Vimudimagga or the Visuddhimagga, the path of freedom and the path of purification. Those are, now we're getting, those are more complicated to get through, and particularly the Visuddhimagga is a hog. It's a hard. If you thought my book was hard, give that one a shot. Anyway, if you like that kind of thing though and want a sort of a more modernized summary version of it, you could check out Shyla Catherine's Wisdom Wide and Deep. So that would be a more modern sort of distillation of the Visuddhimagga and the stuff in there. What else is good? In This Very Life by Sayadaw Upandita. Fantastic, straight up Theravadan stuff. Can't remember why in the world am I not saying this. Practical Insight Meditation, my favorite Dharma book of all time. So by the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw. So Practical Insight Meditation, a book that is small, pithy, outrageously to the point, and it's amazing. People read it and they don't notice how much ridiculously cool information is in it. So if you read it, really, really look at what you're reading, because I talked to lots of people who are like, oh yeah, I read that and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, if you read that and you followed what it said, you would not be asking me the questions you're asking. You would know for yourself. So it's a book that would be easy to underestimate because it's not very long, but like the first 40 something pages are gold. Just, yeah, I mean, the whole book isn't that long, but yeah, the first 40 something pages are amazing.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify with people that I don't think that your book is hard to read. It's dense though. It's not. It's something that's meant to be practiced as much as read
That's true.
and really digested. So yeah, just to try to read it like you're skimming through it is impossible and probably a waste of time.
That's probably true. Yeah.
I really enjoy film, and I find that film can be particularly inspiring sometimes in terms of ideas. Are there any films that you ever recommend to people, or that have really caught your eye that have a spiritual bent to them?
That's interesting. I haven't thought that much about that one. What the bleep do we know? It's all right. It's there's some profound stuff in there. It's actually, so that's a good one. What else comes to mind? It's funny. I don't generally think about film. I sort of lead a hyper compartmentalized life where I keep things in sort of different categories, and I don't generally think about. I think of movies mostly for entertainment, and don't think them about a lot about them in terms of spiritual teaching, and perhaps I should. I mean, they're the classic, Buddhist movies out there, but none of them really look like, to me, what I think of as really good stuff you would follow for practice.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I was just curious. Are you? Are you a teacher, or can people study with you, or what? How do you see yourself in the spiritual landscape?
Yeah. So the answer is no, and kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit is how this works. So I work a full-time gig as an emergency room physician, more than full-time actually. And then on top of that, I have I'm an assistant medical director of a level 1 trauma center emergency department in northern Alabama. And those two things take a whole lot of time. Then I'm married. And so I like to make sure that my relationship gets some attention. And I have...
you are a wise man.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. If you're going to be married, you might as well try to do it well. And then I have been run the Dharma Overground and am its main administrator. And not that I don't have some other people who help me moderate it and run the place, which I do think. So I'm very thankful for all of the people who help make that place what it is. But it does take some time to go through it and pay attention to what's going on there. And then, so I'm trying to finish up the second edition of my book, which is taking most of my free time these days when I'm not doing all those other things. And somewhere in there, I like to have fun and sleep and eat and all that stuff. So, and exercise. And so I don't have a whole lot of time. So I do, sometimes get emails from people, and I'll try to get back to them within a few weeks. Usually I do occasionally have Skype calls with people or telephone calls with people. That's usually a one-time thing where I refer them to people who have time, which at the moment I don't. I'm trying to figure out how to strip my life down at the moment. It's not as easy as you might think. So that's a 2-year project to figure out how I'll have a little more time and space to do some more Dharma things. But in the meantime, there are all kinds of other good people out there that you can interact with and study with. If you're looking for contact that's more than like one conversation in which half of it is me directing you to other resources.
Sure. You have a website. What's the address for that?
So you could look up integrateddaniel.info or interactivebuddha.com. They both direct to the same website. Is sort of my own personal website where I post some Dharma stuff, and there's some a few videos and some podcasts, and the book is available online for free, by the way, there if you want it, or you can find it on the Dharma Overground. There are plenty of other copies in the world, or if you want to pay for it, you can buy a copy or whatever, but it is available for free because I like to try to keep money and the Dharma as far away from each other as possible most of the time. I use the little bit of money I get from the book to help fund the cost of the website and some other Dharma stuff I do.
Nice.
So, yeah. And don't take anything for teaching. So if you're wanting to give me any donation or anything, I won't take it. You could give it to Doctors Without Borders or your favorite charity, someone who's out there saving lives and doing good in the world, because I'm doing okay.
Nice.
And then let's see here. And then there's the Dharma Overground. That's dharmaoverground.org. And there are a lot of people there who like to help other people to learn to meditate well and explore these things and have fun. And like any online forum, it has its fiery and sparky and trolly and, complicated moments. But that's just,
Right.
that's the internet. We all know that by now. So you shouldn't expect anything necessarily different there, though we do try to keep it, to a dull roar as opposed to endless screaming. So those are some of the additional resources that might be helpful.
Great. Great. Nice. Oh, well, that's all the questions I have. Is there anything that you had a thought of during the interview that you want to mention, or?
Yeah, so usually there's some reason that someone like yourself is interviewing someone like me, and there's something there that, might be helpful to talk about. So what was the interest? What sparked your interest? What are you looking for, and how are you going to get it?
My reason for doing the interview is twofold, I think. One is this imagined audience that I want to try to expose to teachings and resources that they might not otherwise come across, that I have judged from afar to be of value. And so this is the opportunity to actually speak with that person, that teacher, and find out what they have to offer. So there's that aspect of it. And then for myself, I'm still trying to work out teaching, how to teach, what are practices. My background was almost without maps, and
That's hard.
consequently today, when I think, how am I going to synthesize the things that I've gone through and the things that I've found and come up with something that resembles, if not a system, at least some logical advice? That's proving to be challenging. I'm actually writing a book as well, and trying to put some of these things down in terms of how does all of this fit into a model. And because I didn't have well-formed models, for that reason of this danger of models, teachers that I was with, some of them saw a great danger in talking too much about what might be ahead. While I think that was wonderful and that it worked, it was also tough, and a lot of doubt and a lot of not knowing. And then as I say, I find myself today in a place where what can I say of value? And so I'm looking around at other people's paths and what's happened to them, and seeing bits of myself, if you will, in things that you're talking about. And, oh yeah, I know what he means. I never thought about it that way. That's good. I like that. That's a good formulation. That's helpful to people. So I'm picking up bits and pieces of things like that.
Nice. Yeah, well, there's some great maps out there. I mean, there's some bad maps out there, and there's some okay maps that have grains of truth, and then there's some really awesome maps. I mean, one of the things I really like about the Theravada and the 16 stages is that is a great map. It is freakishly predictable, and it's very explanatory and can help people really, it is, when you start talking to people, it is very hard not to see that pattern again and again. And I don't think that's just scripting or someone like trying to fit everybody into a little box. I actually think that map just happens to really describe attentional and spiritual development unusually well. And I think they just like people who describe, human anatomy or human, embryonic development, if you describe it well enough, you've just described it, and that's what it is. And I think some of these maps, particularly the 16 stages of insight that come out of the Abhidhamma and the commentaries are remarkable. Oh, the Abhidhamma, by the way, if you want to go back to the original sources on this stuff. Usually comes to people as in the book, A Manual of Abhidhamma is a great place to check if you want old Theravadan straight up lists and analysis and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not that easy to practice from, but very good background theory if you're looking to find some of the original source material for some of these things.
Great. Well, that's all I have, Daniel.
Well, I hope this has been helpful for someone. And if it hasn't, go find something else that is. Because
I
there's
like
helpful
that.
stuff out there and it's doable. And I hope this has been enjoyable for you. And yeah, it's been great talking with you.
It's been very enjoyable. I really appreciate it.